start the stream now. I will let you know when you're live. You are live.
Hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Simone Hermanson and I am from Sydney, Australia, ready to take you underwater in the Grand Caymans and see what we can find today. I have Emil on camera with me today, the crazy Hungarian. Hey there, Emil. And I also have Patrick, who is also from Australia, to give me some awesome surfer support for you.
Yeah, I'm on I'm from the better part of Australia.
Ah, big call, mate. Alright, so we're diving Casuarina Point, just outside of Don Foster's Dive Centre today. And I am hoping to find a few crustaceans for you today. So crustaceans includes some lobsters, some shrimp and crabs, and who knows what else. But send us through a few things that you wish to see using the diveLIVE hashtag on Twitter, watching our diveLIVE stream on Facebook, on our Facebook page, as well as our diveLIVE, where else? Oh, YouTube as well, so our chat on YouTube. Send some questions and Pat will send them down to me.
Don't be afraid to ask anything that you might see on your screen, any questions or queries or even any feedback or comments that you may have.
Now I'm down at 13.5 meters. How many feet is that, Pat?
So that is about 45 feet down.
Thank you. I'm not very good at my conversions just yet. It is 27 degrees Celsius, which is about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And the visibility today, it's a little bit murky because the tide is currently going out. So I'd say the visibility is about 15 to 20 meters, about 50 to 60 feet.
So when she's talking about visibility, that is literally just saying how far ahead of her she can see before things start getting a bit unclear.
Yeah, the more visibility is really good because we, can see lots of stuff, but it actually means there's less food in the water for the fish to eat. The more food in the water column, the more the fish come out to play. So it's not all bad to have less visibility, I'll tell you that.
Yes, that's right. So plankton is anything that's stirred up in the water that doesn't have the ability to fight the current. So this can be both algae and animal alike. We call the algae or any plankton that uses sunlight for their energy as phytoplankton. And any animals, anything that's a heterotroph, which means it eats food, it supports its own metabolism, is a zooplankton.
Yeah, and a lot of big animals that you see on the reefs now, the fish and the crustaceans that we are searching for, can actually start as plankton. So they start like weeny little tiny beings that just float in the water column and kind of land on whatever reef that they decide to. And that will be their home for their life.
Now, you said that you were after some crustaceans today. What specific ones? A spiny lobster, or a cleaning shrimp, or...?
Yeah, well, also an yellow line arrow crab. I do really like arrow crabs because they kind of look like spiders and they look a little bit creepy. They'll commonly be in cracks and crevices, so underneath crevices, even hanging upside down. So they kind of look like Spider-Man a little bit. I really, really like them, and they have these bright purple claws.
Now, Simone, Ian wants to know, are there any sand gobies here?
Yeah, there certainly is sand gobies here. When we can definitely do a lap around and find some sand gobies for you, but they are very, very shy little animals, so we might not be able to show them to you, Ian.
And we also have some requests to identify some coral species today as well.
Oh, we could definitely give that a go.
Ooh, a hamlet.
Yeah, we've got a mast hamlet just up ahead here. That's the white fish with black markings on its eyes. There we go, you're getting a good view of him.
Now, just a quick note, we do apologise to anyone who hears some background noise. We are operating off the dock here at Don Foster's Dive Centre, and so there is a little bit of chatter going on in the background.
That's all right.
So this is a mast hamlet.
Yeah, so he looks like a reef fish, but he's actually really closely related to the large bass that many of you would have seen on your dinner plates.
Now, I don't actually know where the name Hamlet comes from, but I'm assuming it must be something Shakespeare-esque.
Hey, maybe they're good at English literature. Probably better than me. You know, if I found a fish like this, I'm not sure if I would call it a hamlet. But I think the mast really makes sense. I'd probably call it maybe a raccoon fish.
Yes, definitely with that species, but they come in such a diverse range of forms. So they generally have the same body shape, but they can come in a whole range of different colours. For example, this morning on my dive, we got an indigo hamlet, which had some real intricate white and bluey indigo bars.
Yeah, there's actually a discussion within the scientific community debating whether the different colour variations are actually different species or just colours. So they could be the same species, they're just, you know, come across as different colours. We actually don't know. And they do breed together. Yeah,
and that's further confused by the fact that they can actually produce hybrids, which means that two species of hamlet, even though they are technically separate species, can still have fertile offspring together. So it makes the waters even more cloudy. Excuse the pun.
Yeah, it's really hard to distinguish, and so much DNA studies have to go in to really decipher these close or far relationships. So maybe we'll leave him alone. Normally they hide in caves, so it's very lucky that we saw him swimming around, you know, checking everything out. Maybe he's going for a bit of a clean or something like that. We might loop around and head down this way, Emil.
Now, just quickly, Simone, Alex sends his goodbyes. He is heading to the airport now.
Farewell, Alex. Our amazing tech man who has made all of this possible for you to see is departing. He is happy with his job here. I think he's done a fantastic job. I hope everyone is enjoying the underwater world that we've been bringing to you. And we might actually stop here because this is a really amazing species of coral. We've had some requests to show different corals, and I think this is a pretty good spot.
Yes, most definitely. And that fish in the middle there is a damselfish.
Yeah, so this will be the damselfish's home. And we can see in front of him he's busy defending a coral known as an plethora or staghorn coral. So you can quite easily see why it's called a staghorn coral. So this coral has a very hard outer shell. It's not going to, oh, not a shell, but it's not going to sway in the water movement. Whereas this is a different kind of coral. This is a gorgonian. Sometimes I say gorgonzola because I get mixed up, and I'm sorry, my mind is always on food. So that has a much softer skeleton, as you can see. So it is swaying in the current just a little bit.
Yes, and this is because they have more of a protein-based skeleton than calcium carbonate like most corals have, which makes them a little bit less hardy. And that's why they tend to protrude up from the reef rather than contribute to the hard structure of the reef, because they can sway and take a little bit of current. And so it's better for them to sit up and filter food out of the current than be permanently attached to the reef and stay hard.
Yeah, and then over here we have a brain coral. So I might just get out of this way.
So right in the middle here of where you're looking, we have a brain coral, and it's no guessing as to why they are called a brain coral. They look like it's been pulled straight out of Simone's skull.
Yes, my brain is that big. I'm glad you think that, Pat. And right here we've got Pat's little brain. That's also a brain coral.
Oh yes, a little cute one there.
Awesome. So I hope that gives you an idea of a couple of corals we get. And actually, I don't know if this will come up. These are feather duster worms over here.
Oh, yes, we can see them very well. So that's a colony of feather duster worms, and we can see they're protruding out of that calcareous tube there, which is made of calcium carbonate, and they have the radioles that sit out in that circular shape there that looks like a fan, where they get the name feather duster worms. And they sit there and they will filter food particles out of the current.
Yeah, it's crazy to think they actually are worms. So that's the little appendage that they are filtering food and also oxygen out of. And you can see that colour, that purple colour just pops. It's really glorious. They come in loads of different colours, so I love seeing them swaying around. Something's been brought to my attention behind me. Wasn't too sure what it was, but let's see what Emil has spotted.
Okay, while you're doing that, we have a question here from James asking, do any other coral species on this reef besides fire coral have a Medusa stage when reproducing? That's a very interesting question, and no, they don't. So the fire coral that James was referring to releases little jellyfish to reproduce that holds the sperm and eggs. Now, the gorgonians that we saw earlier and the stony corals don't have this phase. It's only the hydroids, which is what the fire coral is. There's also stylasterines, which are also a type of, well, they're very, very closely related to fire coral, but they do have a Medusa phase. But the stony corals and the gorgonians do not.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find a fire coral. We might actually just see if we can get that trunkfish. It's very, very beautiful. Do you think we'll be able to get it, Emil? We were just following a very beautiful trunkfish. I think he might be swimming away though. But yeah, so corals very rarely kind of leave the sanctity of their corally homes. Unless they are spawning, and that's when they kind of up and reproduce and throw their eggs out into the abyss. Now it does look like our little friend is going to leave us, but that's okay, because that means I can show you what fire coral is. Now fire coral leaves a really nasty sting. Let me see, there's normally loads around here, and which is a good thing, but also a terrible thing.
I think I can see some right down, yes, yep, at the bottom of where you're looking now. So that is a fire coral, that really branched, intricate coral there. And it's not actually a true coral, as I said before, it is a hydroid. And this means that it has a Medusa phase, as I was also talking about. So to elaborate on that a little bit, they will reproduce asexually to form this colony that you're seeing right now, but they also reproduce sexually. So this means that when they've established a colony like the one you're seeing, that they will release little jellyfish, and these jellyfish are essentially just packets of sperm and egg, and they'll drift about, release the sperms and eggs, and they will form a larva that will settle and grow again into another colony by reproducing asexually in a process that is called an alteration of generations.
Yeah. They're pretty amazing. It's so easy to look at this reef and think, oh, these are just boring plants, but they're not boring plants by any means. They are animals that are relatively aware of, you know, what's happening. If they're able to sting you, they're able to figure out that they're in danger, right? Only makes sense. So, wow, there you go. And, oh, yeah, Pat! We were just talking about seeing a purple-tipped anemone, and here we go.
Oh, yes, we were. So Simone and I were Simone was telling me that she hasn't seen a purple giant anemone here. They come in many different colours, and there we go. So I hope you're happy now, Simone.
I am very happy, yay.
That is gorgeous.
Yeah, so this is the relative of the fire coral that we were talking about.
Yeah, so this is in its polyp phase. So if you remember me talking about the Medusa phase, that's the jellyfish one that swims around in the current and is able to move about. Now, anemones can move about, but generally they will stay attached in their polyp phase.
Aren't they just so glorious? So these are the giant anemone, the Caribbean giant anemone. And those tips can come in greens, oranges, and purple like we see. So I'm so happy to see this purple one here. And they often have creatures living inside. So I can't see any, but I will tell you if one pops up. So the creatures, unfortunately, we don't have anemone fish here, but we do have lots of anemone shrimp and anemone crabs that form a symbiotic relationship, which means they don't get stung by the tentacles.
And we have a question here from Henk. They want to know, how do we prevent overgrowth of corals? Now, I haven't honestly ever heard of corals overgrowing any type of environment because they add such complexity to the substrate or the habitat that they're in. They're always generally boosting biodiversity, which is the amount of different species there are, by providing a more complex substrate and providing places for other organisms to settle and grow, increasing the amount of food available, filtering the water. I mean, they have so many beneficial processes, even protecting the coastlines from eroding by blocking wave action and current action. So they do so much that there's not really ever too many corals.
Yeah, Emil, actually, if you were to come over here, a really good example of, well, coral overgrowth is, there's a, I believe it's a coral, let me just double check, yeah, it looks like coral, growing with this poor sponge. So this coral has kind of, sorry, these are two sponges, this sponge has overgrown the other, but it's natural, you know. This is the constant battle that we are seeing on the reefs. They're fighting against each other to claim the best spot on the reef.
Yes, so we call that competition, which is no real surprises there. And even though these animals can't move and remain attached where they are, they're still always competing for space and resources.
Yeah, they certainly are. So I think that we can all agree that the larger sponge has won at this point. So this little dainty sponge has lost his battle, slowly but surely.
And most species that are attached and come in contact with each other, they'll usually use chemical warfare on each other because they don't have anything else really. So they release a lot of deterrents and toxins and even some chemicals that can dissolve whatever they're coming in contact with. So these wars are very slow and not very visible, but they are always happening here on the reef.
Yeah, it's a tough gig. I'm pretty happy in my own home. I don't have to worry about, you know, chemicals coming at me. These guys have it tough. Now we have shallowed up on this reef. So I think we might head maybe back down to see if there's a spiny lobster down underneath the ledge.
So Richard wants to know, how fast do different types of coral grow? Well, that's a really interesting question. So the staghorn coral that you can see right in the middle right now that we showed you earlier, they are actually one of the fastest growing corals, and they can grow up to, I think, about 10 centimetres a year, maybe even quicker. But some slow growing corals literally grow at 2 to 3 millimetres a year. And generally, a slower growth means a denser skeleton, which means they are more resilient. So because this species here, the elkhorn coral, or staghorn coral, sorry, is more quick to grow, they are also more brittle and tend to be more prone to snapping. Whereas slower growing corals and encrusting corals are denser and hardier and therefore are more resistant to breakage.
Yeah, these are also the fast-growing animals. They are really susceptible to disease and climate change as well. So it's kind of a trade-off. You can grow fast, but you die fast. Live fast, die young, right? And I just want to show you guys, right next to it is a green tips anemone there. Just want to show you the contrast of the same species having those different colours.
Oh wow, so this one's got quite bulbous tips on the end, so they're gas-filled to keep them afloat there in the current. Now, Emil, I've actually just seen something over here which is going to put a bit of a sour note on our beautiful, beautiful dives today. Just want to head over here. Now we do apologise, there is a lot of activity in the air here today as well, so we do have a few planes flying over the top in case anybody can hear the audio interruptions there.
Yeah, so we've just got this down here, mate. Here is a little bit of rubbish on the reef with stark contrast to the beauty that we get to see normally. Now obviously I will pick it up very gently. I'm not going to knock anything over. But in the light of World Oceans Day, which is, I think, on Friday, it's really important to remember that not all your rubbish will end up in the rubbish tip. We've got to be careful where we put these things.
And just while we're talking about pollution and rubbish, we have a question from Monique asking, what is the biggest threat to corals? Pollution, rising sea temperatures, and the latter of those two is definitely the biggest problem right now. So sea surface temperatures are definitely on the rise in response to global warming. And what this does is that it makes the environment inside the corals not livable for these tiny little pieces of algae that actually live inside the coral and photosynthesize and the corals use this energy and nutrients produced from the algae to feed themselves. So something like 80% of their nutrition and energy comes from these little bits of algae. So when the sea surface temperature in some cases even raises by 1 degree Celsius, then this can cause the algae to spurt out these, the corals to spurt out these algae, and then they will go a pale colour. They won't be able to produce nutrition for themselves, and it will eventually die. I mean, they can recover. They can sometimes take the algae back in, but if it happens for too long, then yeah, it's goodbye coral and goodbye colour as well. So if you see really pale, drab-looking corals, then you can pretty much guarantee that it's been bleached.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. And
is that a sea cucumber there?
We just stopped Emil. Emil has spotted a beautiful sea cucumber. So we'll just have a look at him, and he's actually half hiding in a cave right now. Half putting his face pretty much onto some algae there. And this is really cool. So he's kind of moving. I hope you see the really gentle movements that this creature is doing right now.
Yes. Wow, that's a very spiny looking sea cucumber. Now, sea cucumbers are echinoderms, which means that they're actually related to starfish and or sea stars, and sea urchins as well. And it's pretty hard to imagine or notice that here, but the 5 segments that make up a sea star have actually been modified in the sea cucumber into the body plates that make up the shape, this cylindrical shape that we can see.
Yeah, they're pretty amazing. And they do sense our presence. They don't just lay down and hope for the best. So they do have they are able to sense our presence and react to, outer stimulus. And they actually go through and filter out all the things that are in the sand and in the water. They are filter feeders. Now, I feel really bad for these guys. The reason I do feel bad for them is they have terrible names. So some of the beautiful names sea cucumbers get is the burnt sausage of Australia and the donkey dung cucumber. It's also a bit of a terrible name. So I think they're quite wonderful creatures myself.
Yes, and they are so good that James actually requested one at the start of this episode. So there you go, James. We've got a sea cucumber for you, mate.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it. It's really, really groovy. And if anyone was, or a fish was to try and bite it, it would very, very, very quickly retract back into its hiding space in the cave. They are surprisingly agile creatures. They have rudimentary muscles, but they actually have a very fine hydraulic system where they move tiny little tube feet that allows them to walk. So yeah, hydraulics, muscles, and terrible names. That is the sea cucumbers that we get here. Now, as you guys can see, we are going back and down to deeper waters, more sandy areas.
And just while we're having a bit of a look here, Tom wants to know what the temperature is of the water. And while you're at it, Simone, why don't you give us an air check and a depth update?
Yeah, definitely.
Give us all your stats.
All my stats. Okay. So I am at 13.5. It is 27 degrees Celsius, which is 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
And about 45 feet depth.
Yeah, thank you. And I have 130 bars. There's still quite a lot of air to be able to hang out with you today. And we are descending onto a sandy patch of reef.
And what are you hoping to find out here on this sandy patch, Simone?
Oh, well, exactly what I have just seen. A conch shell. A crustacean. Oh, not a crustacean, sorry. Invertebrates.
Close. A mollusk.
A mollusk.
Or a gastropod, more specifically, which are snails, also related to the land snails.
Yes, now this one doesn't seem to be alive, but it is the shell. And I do want to talk about its shell anyway, so that's okay. This is the shell of a queen conch shell, quite famous in the Caribbean, because it is so large. Now this one is probably the size of a basketball. Pretty large for any kind of shell. And what's really interesting about these shells is they're actually made out of what we know as chalk. So what we know as chalk, yet it is so structurally sound. How does it do that? On a molecular level, it creates a structure that keeps integrity. And engineers have been looking at the molecular structure of shells for years, trying to figure out how on earth they do this.
Yes, it's quite a complex process. If you're into your crystallography, you might have a better idea than us, but I believe it is because the layers of calcite and aragonite, which are both calcium carbonate, but their molecular structure is slightly different. And so they can arrange these into crystal layers that will be really, really structurally sound.
And we're just getting these blue tangs swinging past.
Yes, that's a giant school of blue tangs. So blue tangs are surgeonfish, which get their name because they have a very, very sharp spike. You can see that white spot towards the base of the tail there, and that is a spine that is as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, hence the name. And what's interesting about this spike is that it doesn't actually sit in a fixed position in the tail. So as they move their tail from side to side, the spike will slip in and out. So it will be sticking out at one side at a time. Now, if this was to strike something, it would go in at a 90-degree angle and fix itself in. So it would be a very deep and very hard to remove strike.
There are just so many, and they're swimming so perfectly in sync.
Yes, and they are not fazed by Emil at all.
No,
He is a bit of an ocean creature himself.
He certainly is. Wow, I've never seen a group this big, and it's really cool because the way they swim is quite different to many fish. They flap their pectoral fins, which is their side fins, up and down, kind of like a bird, and you can see how they're just freezing. They're feeding. And this is a cousin of Dory, the tang that we know from Finding Nemo.
Yes, we can see the similarities in body shape, just a little bit different in their coloration. And now they are flocking through here. Flocking's probably not the right word, but that's what it always makes me think of, because they use their pectoral fins, which is their side fins, to almost flap like birds, and then they all move in coordinated movements. They're all herbivorous, which means that they will eat algae. So one spots a patch of algae, and they all spot a patch of algae. And as we can see right now, they just ravage it.
And it's almost sad because damselfish are farmers. They create eyeball patches that they nurture and they defend so no other animal will eat it. Except, as you can imagine, a ferocious school of these guys. A damselfish cannot stop 100 tangs coming in and eating all of its crops. And you can see it's almost like a hurricane.
Yes, and they're always very, very relaxed when they're schooling like this. They're not very fazed by our presence at all. And I think that's just because of the strength in numbers aspect.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, nothing would want to, take them on because of this scalpel, laid on their tail, and then, when there's 100 of them, it lowers the chances of them being attacked. So very, very cool.
And just while we're on them, Crazy Legs wants to know, why is there a couple of other random fish in amongst that school?
Really good question. Safety in numbers. If you feed on the same thing as them, it's really good to hang out with them because you're all looking for the same type of food. Also, you can see that there's sometimes a bit of sand that was stirred up from their presence. So anything that eats crustaceans under the sand would look pretty good at hanging with them. If they were hanging with them, they can eat anything that gets, sorry, I'm getting really close to the camera, that gets sifted up. And that is a really good, easy meal.
Yes, most definitely. And Simone, now I believe that piece of rubbish you picked up was a dive flag, was it not?
Yeah, it certainly was, Pat.
And Paula was asking, what is a dive flag used for?
So dive flags are used to indicate where divers are positioned. So if some people dive, they have a dive flag above them just to show where boats are going. Just to show where boats don't hit the divers. So unfortunately, something has happened. It may have come off of a boat. It may have, God knows, anything, and gone down onto the reefs. So you've got to be really careful when you're around the marine environment. So we've just got a very relaxed schoolmaster over here. That's a snapper.
Yes, just coming into screen now with the yellow fins right there. That is a schoolmaster snapper.
It's quite large, actually. And he seems quite placid right now.
Can you give us a size estimate, Simone?
Yeah, probably about 1.5 feet. Wow, very relaxed indeed.
Yeah, so it's very, very relaxed, probably because it's not on the hunt. So when fish aren't doing something that needs to be done, usually feeding and mating when it comes to fish, they will tend to rest. So they don't actually sleep like humans do, but by resting, they are slowing down their metabolism and allowing their body to repair. And they're called schoolmasters because they're the masters of schooling. They are very, if you this one's by itself, but they do sometimes come together in aggregations called schools, and they move very in sync in these schools. So back before the scientific knowledge was there, people believed that it was because they could communicate telepathically. That's just how in sync their movement was.
Yeah, all fish are pretty in tune, especially those blue tags that we actually got to see before. They're using that lateral line to communicate to each other as well, or to sense each other more so.
Yes, and it's actually led by the middle fish. So the fish that's in the middle of the school is actually dictating where the rest of the school goes. And we can see it's got a very thick, robust lips and a strong jaw, and we can't see inside the mouth, but inside the mouth it actually has some very pointy, graspy teeth. So we can tell a lot by looking at the mouth of a fish, because the shape of the mouth kind of dictates what prey it will go for, if it's an animal or a plant. So this one has strong jaws and grasping teeth, so we can tell from that it wants to catch something, keep it there and make sure it doesn't move, which would be a small fish or a crustacean.
Yeah, and also the position on the face as well. So you have obviously downward facing mouth. They're most likely going to be sifting through sand. Forward or terminal mouths is what the big predators kind of have. Those are the ones that will attack from the front. And then if my mouth is facing up, I'm probably almost opportunistic and a predator, as in I come up underneath fish without them knowing. So there are these little signs that you guys can look for to kind of figure out what these animals are eating. And then obviously you have parrotfish with beaks. So they obviously scrape algae and corals off because of their strong beaks.
Paula,
now, if anyone would be able to tell me what type of mouth a snail has. If they eat algae, I'll be very impressed.
Yes, yes. Show us your marine biology skills.
Yeah.
So Paula wants to know, Simone, what's causing the cloudiness in the water?
So the tide is going out right now, which can affect visibility. So when the tide goes out, it sucks out the sand particles from the sandy beaches that we have here. So these little particles can reduce the visibility. There also are little animals and little plants called plankton that is brought in by different currents around the world. And this feeds the fish and is a high nutrient value. But as you can imagine, that can reduce the visibility as well. So that's the cloudiness that we're seeing as well.
Yes, so there's a lot in the water. So next time you accidentally swallow a mouthful of seawater, you're actually consuming quite a lot of plants and animal life as well as some sand.
Yeah, and they're like plankton is just so much life. It includes bacteria, viruses, animals, plants, just absolutely anything. The juvenile fish, juvenile crustaceans. It's crazy. If you get a little glass of seawater and put it under a microscope, the things that you can see, oh, it's more than what you would see on this entire reef. It's amazingly abundant.
We have a comment here from Monique, and she's saying, I didn't know a fish could have a beak. I've lived a sheltered life. And yes, that is correct. We will actually point out a parrotfish for you if we come across one. They have fused teeth that actually form a beak. And what this function serves is that they can grasp onto crunch into rocks and scrape off any algae that's living on the rock.
Yeah, they certainly can. I'll have a look see if we can find a parrotfish. Maybe just down here we would have some parrotfish feeding. Just over here.
Yeah, so that mottled, drab-looking fish down the bottom left-hand side, or now in the middle, is a parrotfish, and it goes up and takes a nip of the rock. That would demonstrate my point greatly.
There he is.
There we go. So you can see it's using its beak there to scrape algae off the rocks.
Yeah, they come in amazing colours. I love parrotfish. They're very friendly little guys. Parrotfish, I would say, is one of the most abundant type of fish on these reefs. And the beauty of parrotfish is they regulate this ecosystem. So in some places where fishing for parrotfish is really common, such as the Red Sea, when you take all these parrotfish out, there's too much algae and it chokes the coral. So it's a really good sign to be seeing so many of them. They also come in some awesome colours like you just saw, and I'll try and point out a few more. Now, I still am on the hunt for a spiny lobster. Don't think I have given up on you guys just yet. Promise, I will find something cool.
In the meantime, let's just get a little bit of your own opinion there, Simone. Sheila wants to know, what is your favourite fish and your favourite coral?
Oh, Sheila, that's a good question. What is my favourite fish? See, it's funny, I always think about crustaceans. I don't really think about fish too much as a favourite, but I would probably say a fairy basilisk. So that's the bright purple and bright yellow fish that we sometimes see here. Hopefully we'll pass one and I'll point it out, because they are very, very sassy and have a lot of attitude. So I've seen them fight off some nosy shrimp here and there. It's pretty interesting. As for coral, I'm not really sure. I haven't got a favourite just yet. Now let's head down this way, Emil. And maybe we can go and sit on the sand and see what pops out. I know that someone was looking for a sand goby.
And Lady Starfire's 7-year-old daughter Tesla was also wondering how close you were to garden eels. So I'm sure if we head out onto the sand, we can get some garden eels as well.
Yeah. Let me grab my cord and head out there.
Oh yes, and we can already see the garden eels. So those small black hair-like projections coming out from the sand are actually little eels filtering food out of the water. and they all have their own individual burrow that they can readily come out and in of very quickly. Wow, there's thousands today.
I'm so happy we're seeing this. Yesterday they were a little bit shy, but I think today they'll be okay. So what Emil and I are going to do is we're going to lower ourselves onto the sand. There isn't anything underneath us. I'm unsure as to what you're pointing at. Oh, yes, a conch shell. Okay. Alright, so we're just going to head straight to the garden eels again that we have right in front of us. So let's have a little seat and watch them.
So, garden eels are obviously eels. They are still fish, but they are not they are not like other fish in that they actually lack scales. So this gives them a real smooth, kind of slender body, which means that they can easily come in and out of those little burrows there.
Yeah, and they're all facing a very similar direction because they're facing into the current. They are plankton feeders. So they're looking into the current, watching all the little plankton that might swing on by them, and they're picking it out. Now you can imagine if your food was flying at you at a very fast pace, you'd probably have to have some pretty good eyesight. So they actually have eyesight similar to humans, which is pretty cool when you think how different they are to us.
Yeah, so life did evolve from the sea. So it's quite baffling to see how many similar adaptations that there are in the ocean with us on land. I mean, even fish eyes are very structurally similar to a human eye.
Yeah, and the eyes are so complex and important for feeding in pretty much most terrestrial and aquatic animals.
And now, while we've got that conch shell there on the right, we can see it's poking its little siphon out as well. So Simone did ask people whether a question in regards to the mouth of sea snails, and James has commented and saying that he knows that land snails have modified teeth called radula that they use for feeding on algae, or even, I mean, not algae, this is land, sorry, on plants and other animals. And this is actually the same with sea snails as well. They also have this radula, which is, as James said, modified teeth that they can use to munch algae or other prey items, including even sometimes other snails.
Yeah, he is correct. They do have these modified teeth, so they can scrape off algae from rocks and etc. Now these ones can also do the same. Most sea snails feed in the exact same way. And hopefully he'll poke his eyes out, because they do kind of look like there's no creature underneath, but there is a creature in that shell in particular. They have quite good eyesight, and they actually have very, very good chemosensory smelling organs. So they can pick up when another conch shell has been in their territory, or if they're looking for a mate, they can also find a lovely lady that's nearby. Now you can imagine the battles that these guys have could be pretty ferocious. Slow but ferocious.
Yes. So we did speak earlier about how attached animals such as corals can have very slow wars, where they will slowly grow and come into contact and then use a chemical warfare to beat one another. And then with the slower moving animals, we still get those same battles, but they're a little bit slower still. And then as you move up and up towards the faster moving fish, then that's when you get the really aggressive strikes. So even though things move slowly, it doesn't mean they don't have a defense mechanism.
Yeah, and the garden eels that we're looking at right now as well, they are very fierce, and they do attack each other frequently. It's really easy to see when action is ahead of you when you are looking at garden eels, because if everyone is facing in the same direction eating food, if one's facing the other direction, it's very simple to see, and they're probably battling. Now they use their mouths to attach and wrestle, and sometimes pull the other one out of their burrow. Now that sounds like it couldn't be that bad. Oh, he's just pulled out of his burrow. Guess who's waiting? Snappers. The snappers will actually sit on by, waiting for the fight to ensue, and gobble up the loser.
Yes, we saw this the other day. We found a snapper sitting there on the sand, just completely motionless, almost like it was in a meditative trance. Now, I didn't know at the time why it does this, but as Simone just said, they just sit there and patiently wait, sometimes for hours and hours, for a little guard meal to come out or for something to happen, and then they'll snatch it up.
Yeah, and for those of you who think, what on earth is a snapper, what is a mutton snapper, what are you all talking about? Maybe if we swim forward, we can show them that mutton snapper that's busy hiding under that ledge over there.
And while we're going over there, our good dive buddy Adam is asking for an air check.
Thanks there, Adam. So I am on 70 baht, so I can stay down a little bit longer with you today, but then I will have to rise to do my safety stop. So just up ahead we have a mutton snapper. These guys are notorious for sitting on the sand waiting for a garden eel to come out of its burrow.
Yes, yes, so that exactly demonstrates what I was just talking about.
Look how he's watching with intent.
Yes. And just to give a little bit of perspective as to where we're diving, we are on the western side of Grand Cayman Island here, diving off Casuarina Point, out the front of Don Foster's Dive Centre. So if you get that up on Google Maps, you can see where we are. And now Don Foster's have been very, very good to us, and they've just done outstanding work in helping us get these broadcasts out to you guys. So a massive shout out to Don Foster's.
Yeah, Don Foster's have given us everything that we could have ever needed to get this production going. Now we are in the search for an angelfish who's being a little bit elusive.
Yes, we just did see it there in front of us, and
yeah, I think he's swimming off there surprisingly fast. I can definitely reach up some speeds.
There we go. So right in the middle we have a French angelfish, which is the dark fish, not the light fish, that dark fish that's using its pectoral fins to swim.
Yeah, and he's quite large, probably the size of a soccer or a football. Oh, we've got a dog snapper swimming on by as well.
Oh yes, so that's very silvery fish. That's a dog snapper, which is still very, very similar to the schoolmaster we were looking at a bit earlier, but a different species.
So this French angel is probably looking for some food. It does eat sponges as well as algae on the reef. But they do return to their favourite feeding grounds. So I think he's probably going to his favourite sponge.
Yeah, so angelfish are one of the only species here on the reef that will eat sponges. So aside from having a glassy skeleton made up of spicules, which is a silicous substance, they also quite frequently will produce chemical deterrents. Because they're attached, they can't move, they have a very, very, very basic nerve net. They don't really have many defense mechanisms, so to combat this, they just have to produce really nasty chemicals. Ooh, and we got 3 angelfish now.
One of them is a very small juvenile, but yeah, they're
Looks like mummy, daddy, and the little kid.
Yes, now, obviously there is no parental care with these guys, but wow, this one is huge. So this is the largest of the 3, larger than a basketball. Emil's doing some amazing camera work.
A very flat basketball.
Yeah, flattened basketball, exactly. Now we can tell it's a French angelfish because of the yellow patterning.
Yes, and another key identifying feature with angelfish is the little spike on their operculum, or gill covering, which we can see here is that little yellow spike coming back off over the gills. Now, what function this serves, I'm not actually sure, but in other animals, it's because they prevent other parasites from settling or coming in around the gills. So I'm guessing that it's the same with angelfish.
Yeah, so the larger angelfish definitely gave us the drop. We've still got these two, and the reason I'm interested in these two is the smallest one actually has some juvenile markings on it. So I want to see if he's still around, but perhaps not. Now if you guys want to send in your final request of something that you would like to see, I do have a little bit of air left, and if there's something easier in front of me, I will happily point it out to you. So guys, when you see the smaller one of these angelfish, notice that there is a bar running down the front of it. So the smaller of the angelfish is the one furthest away from you. So there is one prominent bar running down this one. It's running down the front of that, and it has a very high dorsal fin there.
Yeah.
So that is the juvenile patterning. Juvenile patterning is lots of bars, so we've still got a little bit of that left. Very interesting indeed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for pointing that out, Simone, because I didn't actually notice that.
Yeah, so he's probably a teenager, and this one doesn't look like he's very happy with the presents. So that really could mean that he has just changed, and he's changed into a bit of an adult in that one's area. Not very impressed. He could be a challenge for food, a challenge for mates. So he's actually trying to chase them off right now.
And that's actually really interesting. It does highlight that why sometimes juvenile fish look much different than the adult version, and that is actually to signify that, hey, I'm not any threat to you yet. I'm still not sexually mature, and I'm not going to eat that much of your food. But now that this one has metamorphosized a little bit and become a little bit more like an adult, then I think they're seen as a bit of a threat.
Yeah, exactly. And he's not giving up, though. Look at this one. He's got some fire in his loins. He wants to stick around because he knows that this could one day be his little area where he can feed. Like he will go after this larger. I'm going to assume they are of different sexes, so one is trying to say, I'll mate with you. Wow, that was really awesome. And we'll finish up on this beautiful mutton snapper swimming past us.
Just before you go, Simone, you're a dive instructor, so you might be able to answer this. It's actually, I don't know the answer, so would like to know too. Take Care wants to know what happens if you sneeze while scuba diving.
Who sneezes while scuba diving? You sneeze while scuba diving. Next time you sneeze, just take a note where you breathe in from. You'll breathe through your mouth and go. See, I just blew out air from my regulator like I normally do while I breathe. If I breathed out of my nose and I was wearing a normal mask, I would just breathe air out of my mask and it would come out. Might be a little bit snotty, but everything would be fine.
Cool, thanks for clearing that one up, Simone.
That's okay. So, unfortunately, I do have to go and do my safety stop, but it was awesome being around with you today. Now, we will see you tomorrow at 7 a.m. Grand Cayman time. Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Emil.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you, the diveLIVE family. We'll see you all here tomorrow.